Man, you don't know how excited we were for this game. Watching the Game Awards in 2019 and having this bombshell of a trailer drop caught us completely off guard. We couldn't believe that Endnight was making a sequel to one of our favorite games. We didn't know when the game was coming out at the time, but we were excited regardless. The first game left such a memorable mark on us that we made an hour-long video discussing basically everything the game had to offer. From the beautiful world, to the wonderfully crafted exploration, to the surprisingly gripping story, the first game had so much charm which made it easy to look past all the annoying jank. After 3 delays, Sons of the Forest was finally scheduled to release on February 23rd, 2023. Now, we need to mention something important before we dive into this disappointment. After the many delays Endnight announced to an increasingly antsy player base, another announcement was made on the Steam page for Sons of the Forest. It's been a long journey since we first started Sons of the Forest development, and it's grown into the biggest, most complex game we have ever made. There's still so much more we want to add: items, new mechanics, gameplay balance, and more. We didn't want to delay again, so have instead decided to involve the community in the continued development of this project, and keep our February 23rd release date, but instead release in early access. If this was any other game, I would have been worried. But this is Endnight we're talking about. They took a pretty bare bones and honestly crappy game like The Forest, and after 4 years, they made an incredible and memorable experience. Plus, the game had been delayed 3 times by this point, so I was expecting the game to be close to completion come the 23rd of February. But let's look closely at one specific sentence in the early access announcement. There's still so much more we want to add: items, new mechanics, gameplay balance, and more. This sentence is very misleading. They make it seem like there's some small stuff they want to add. Maybe some new weapons, balance a few things out, possibly add some new mechanics later down the line like fishing perhaps. No. What they actually meant was that the game isn't close to being done at all. That "and more" part of the sentence means a lot more. But before I delve into why I felt so disappointed with this game, I want to commend Endnight on what the game does right. Let's start with the gorgeous world. This game looks breathtaking. The foliage is so much more dense, the lighting has improved massively compared to the first game, the water looks pristine. This game made me want to go outside and explore real forests. Unfortunately, the winter months make everything look like Fallout 4 where I live, so I'll explore the game for now. First impressions of this game were incredibly high. We found a nice spot to settle down by a pretty lake and got to work building a base. We had Kelvin go out and grab us some fish using nothing but his bare hands while we chopped down some trees. The detail on display when you start chopping down a tree is impressive. You can see how each cut affects the inside of the tree. Not only that, but trees can give you more logs now too. There's a funny glitch where you can send a tree flying forward if you push into it enough as it falls. Those logs are going to be used for building, and my oh my, the new building system is wonderful. Instead of messing around with the frustratingly finicky building system from the first game, Endnight managed to improve upon the first game's mechanics in a way that's less frustrating and even satisfying at times. I love how you make windows by physically chopping off pieces of the logs you placed down when you built your walls. There's a lot to love about the building system. Another aspect about the game that we loved was the addition of guns. The first game had the flintlock pistol, which was incredibly strong, but Sons of the Forest takes it up a notch by adding multiple pistols and the glorious shotgun. The pistols are okay, but the shotgun one-shots basically every enemy. You can also place attachments on them like the flashlight, which is very helpful when going through the pitch-black caves. Guns weren't the only addition to the weapons. We have new arrivals like the stun baton, which is a must if you're in multiplayer, as it stuns the enemies long enough for your buddies to hop in and slash the enemies apart. There's also the addition of the rope gun, which has the ability of creating ziplines by shooting it between 2 points. You can also use that as a weapon. When it comes to the new items in the game, I think they're a fantastic addition to the gameplay overall. As you probably have guessed, you don't just get guns in order to open carry in Burger King. There's plenty of cannibals here, and brother, you're looking like a snack. If you played the first game, the cannibals will feel very similar. There's feral, outcast cannibals that run around on their own, then there's larger groups of cannibals that move around in teams or just stick to their camps, or just spawn randomly out of nowhere. Unlike the first game where cannibals would run at you and try to demonetize your video with their nudity, these cannibals can wear random bits of clothing, shirts, jackets, or even human skin. I'm so glad they're civilized now.
I have to go to work.
They've also acquired a new enemy type in the form of these huge sloth-looking dudes. They act like leaders for the groups of cannibals and will one-shot you with no warning. There's also these giant red guys that look like that one gif of that 3D baby dancing. I don't know what their deal is, but enemy variety is never a bad thing. Besides your average Brexit geezers and Gary, Indiana residents, we also got the mutants. Mutants in the forest are one of the best aspects of the game. You get used to fighting human enemies on the surface. You gain an ounce of confidence and decide to venture deep below the earth, only to find multiple limbed abominations charging at you from the dark, causing you to ruin your Marvel-themed underwear. Sons of the Forest brings us new mutants to meet in our nightmares. Just 2 though. And they're both kinda... whatever. Don't get me wrong, the designs and the animations on the new mutants are incredible, but other than their visuals, they're not really that fun or interesting to fight. One final thing we loved about the game was the general ambience of the caves. The updated look to the caves are very alluring. The lighting in the caves is done so well that we took a moment to look around at the hard work put on display by Endnight. There is a lot to enjoy in Sons of the Forest, but there is also a lot to be disappointed at too. Everything I mentioned before were positives, but they also came with many downsides as well. I mentioned how unique and satisfying the new building system was, but it also has its fair share of annoyances. Now that logs roll depending on the terrain, you need to fully stop a log from moving before being able to cut into it. This isn't an issue, but even if the logs are just barely moving, you won't be able to cut into them. Another annoying thing is how you can't tell where the placement marker is when it snows, as the marker itself is white, so you have to estimate where to place the logs. And as usual, it can be very difficult to place down a foundation that is level, just like in the first game. The weapons also have a few issues. While the shotgun is absolutely fantastic, the pistols are pretty weak. It can sometimes take a whole magazine to take down enemies, especially the larger ones. Luckily, ammo is relatively abundant, but we would usually stick to melee combat rather than use the pistols. We mentioned how the vibes of the caves were super well done, but there are glaring issues with many of the caves in the game. For one, they are nowhere near as intricate as the first game's caves. There is a lack of paths you're able to take that branch out to other cave systems, like in the first game. This problem is also inflated when you come across multiple caves that are literally just one room.
Chocolate. I remember when they first invented chocolate.
We know that eventually these caves will become something interesting, but it really annoyed us after coming across the third empty cave. Overall, the caves were much emptier and less interesting in this game compared to the first. The enemies you'd find in the caves were actually pretty neat, but there was basically no variety when it came to how enemies can attack you. In the first game, enemies like the Cowman would cause you to stumble and fall while they charge at you at lightning fast speeds. But in Sons of the Forest, they all just kinda hit you in the same way. I was hoping for more unique enemy encounters, but they all felt exactly the same. The work Endnight is doing to push the AI in this game definitely shows. One of the AI additions in this game is Kelvin. Kelvin is a character that will do what you tell him to, like gathering sticks or catching fish to eat. Kelvin's usefulness is directly offset by the sheer vapidity of his brain though. There is nothing happening behind those eyes. There were many times during our playthrough where we asked him to get us an item, only to have him run face first into walls or get stuck on a doorway. In one instance, we asked Kelvin to get some logs to help complete the beachfront property we were building. Instead of getting logs from a different area, he just kinda took the logs that we had already gathered and moved them like 2 feet in another direction. Bless his little heart. He's definitely a good addition to the game if you're playing solo, but if you're playing with more than one friend, then he's just kind of a man-sized toddler you gotta prevent from dying. Kelvin shares a single brain cell with another AI, Virginia. She's there, I guess. As far as I could tell, her main role is to bring you random useful items like blueberries and aloe. You could also give her guns to help kill enemies. She's cool. A part of me kind of feels like she might have been added to appeal to Coomers, which is a strategy that's been working better and better these days. The friendly AIs aren't the only ones that feel pretty off though. This could just be our personal bias, as we are huge fans of the first game, but we feel that the cannibals and mutants really lack the same intimidating factor they once had. In the first Forest, there were these moments where you'd just be doing something random in the woods, and just hear the most butt-clenching screech from somewhere not too far off. And while that still happens in Sons of the Forest, it doesn't feel nearly as threatening. The enemies do exhibit new behaviors though. Some will beg or try to crawl away when they've been liberated from their limbs, or others might stop mid-fight and mourn the loss of their fellow cannibal.
She's crying.
L. These new additions are welcome, but they don't stop the combat encounters from becoming pretty tedious very fast. You'll most likely just run past them to avoid any sort of combat, or walk directly up to them and blast them in the face with a shotgun. There's a palpable sense of tension and build-up in the original Forest. The game slowly builds dread by having the cannibals watch you from afar and slowly work their way up to attacking you. You felt like you were in their territory, and you couldn't be sure when you were actually safe. And sadly, this feeling is sorely missed in the sequel. Expect a cannibal attack every 15 to 20 minutes. They go on break for lunch around 1:30. You'll run into these upstanding citizens when traveling around the map, which is a whole other can of worms to get into. This is a weird comparison to make, but this game's map reminds me of a Kmart parking lot. You'll see some of the most beautiful scenery you'll ever find, but it'll be entirely empty. This new island is huge, almost 4 times as big as the previous one, which would be a really great addition to the game if it didn't feel so goddamn empty. There's seemingly endless spans of beaches to run along, numerous caves that don't really contain anything of value, giant mountains that go on forever, and there's so little of interest between. Just think of how many Dollar Generals you could fit here. End Knight knew the map would be difficult when it comes to finding things like caves and dig spots, so they added markers on their GPS. I really hate this. The first game had exploration happen organically, and even when you find the map, locations aren't immediately marked until you come across those locations first. Having dots scattered on your GPS literally telling you where things are is a painfully lazy way of getting the player to explore. It sucks even more when you look at how End Knight implemented ways to get the player to find items like the flintlock in the original. Photos would be scattered around caves with massive X's on them, showing the player where the gun parts were located. It was a creative way of getting the player to explore the world End Knight crafted. The new markers make Sons of the Forest feel like it was in part developed by Ubisoft. Another pretty controversial addition is the underground facilities. These are insanely well designed and hella interesting to move through. Unfortunately, these also lack the awe that they had in the first game. In the forest, there was only one facility at the very end of the game. The realization that this massive complex was under our feet the entire time was earth-shattering, and one of the coolest moments of any game I've ever experienced. In Sons of the Forest, you find a facility like every other cave, and they don't even have Wi-Fi down here. Not really sure how to segue into this, but there are seasons now. Around every 5 days or so, the seasons will change. This is a nice addition and helps the map stay fresh and new. Until you hit winter. Just like in real life, it's miserable. The game runs even worse due to all the snow and having to render the tracks left in them. You also constantly gotta worry about being wet and cold. This makes sense, of course, and Knight is trying to make a survival game. But what should be a major obstacle to get through is just a minor inconvenience. It doesn't seem fleshed out enough. We now have to mention the most frustrating aspect of this game. As massive fans of the original game's story, we were so interested in finding out what was going on within Sons of the Forest. Starting off in a helicopter crash is very reminiscent of the first game. However, the main draw of Sons of the Forest is nowhere near as interesting as in the original. In the forest, your son is taken from you by a creepy looking man covered in red paint. Immediately the story becomes personal, as you now have to find your son. Once you leave the planet and explore the island some more, you realize that it's inhabited by cannibals, which immediately makes you think that your son is dead. But as you explore, you come across pieces of Timmy's toy and drawings he made showing that he made it through some of the most terrifying locations in the game. This all comes together in the most shocking twist of there being an entire facility underneath the island, which is where your son is located. In Sons of the Forest, you're sent to the island to rescue some missing billionaires. Woo. They try to mimic the first game's memorable introduction by having this person pistol whip you in the face, but honestly, it fails in capturing my attention. I have no connection to these rich pricks, so why should I bother risking my life to find them? There's no real incentive in finding the missing billionaires. We spend more time just building and goofing around. I don't want to delve too much into the story because we originally wanted to make an analysis on the game's plot, but we actually can't do that right now for a very big reason. The game is missing massive pieces of its story. End Knight clearly had a starting point and they clearly had an ending, but the middle is completely scatterbrained. There's a general idea given to the player about what is going on, but there are so many questions. And they aren't minimal questions like what the red paint did in the first game, or the beach sharks on the shorelines. No, these were questions that were vital in understanding what the hell was happening. The ending of the game was a left hook to our faces. Why did any of it happen? How does it connect with everything that's going on? You could absolutely say that everything will be explained in future updates, which is true, and that leads me to our final point on why this game was so disappointing. Sons of the Forest had been in development for over 4 years. I am by no means a game developer, so what I'm going to say is coming from a player's perspective. With that, there are some obvious outliers when we look at End Knight's potential release windows. In 2020, after the pandemic threw a wrench in basically everything, End Knight announced a 2021 release window. How? With how the game plays in 2023, what were they thinking with a 2021 release window? With the insane number of missing items, missing story elements, and overall jankiness, I have zero clue why End Knight thought they could muster up a game worth even $10 in 2021. Then came a delay, and then another one, and then another one. After the third delay, everyone was pretty peeved off it was taking so long for this game to be released. Then came the, oh, but with it being delayed, we'll get a more finished product in the end kinds of people ready to defend End Knight. I'm not knocking on developers for estimating release dates wrong. If you need to delay, then just delay. But if you're like End Knight and you get the estimation so wrong that you have to keep delaying the game over and over and over again, it creates this idea that when the game is released, it'll be in a much better state. The issue is, the game was released in early access, and they didn't even announce the early access part until 20 days before the game came out. Is the game in a better place now than if it were released in 2021? Yeah, absolutely. Is it in a good state in general? No. My issue isn't that they took so long to release the game. My issue is that they announced it way too early, delayed it over and over and over again, then released it in early access after they said that they would release it in its full version. This led to me and many others buying the game expecting it to at least have a complete story and being met with incredible jank, half a story, many aspects from the original missing, a massive empty world, and a lot of half-baked ideas. I'm sure this game will be fantastic in a few years like the original, but as of right now, this game needs serious work, and End Night needs to communicate with their player base better, because their silence has led to massive confusion that could have easily been avoided. I know this game will become what End Night wants it to be, but who knows how long it'll take though? Until then, we'll be here, looking for those godforsaken golf balls. Thanks for watching.
You could do the rump shaker, huh? The thug shaker. Give me the thug shaker, dude. Shake your ass.